Well, it actually comes back to the point, if you're going to decide on cause and effect, it's not randomized controlled trial that's going to do it for you. It really has to be an investigation, you know,
Mhm.
somebody actually
Yeah.
talking to you who knows a bit about medicine and knows a bit about the drug and says, well, the most reasonable explanation about what's happening here is this drug is causing this problem in this person.
Hmm.
It may be awfully rare,
Yeah.
but yeah,
A theme
it,
of what you've been saying, I think, is that the bureaucrats in these agencies simply don't have incentives to be motivated to do investigation. They are simply going to process paperwork, and therefore they can be easily guided or manipulated by the clever use and engineering of paperwork by the people submitting it.
yeah, but to go even further, it's not the bureaucrat's responsibility to lead. You've got a bunch of professionals who make a living out of the fact that you can't get these drugs from anyone else other than from them. And it's their responsibility to be doing, to lead in this and to stand up and say, well, look, we aren't going to prescribe your drug anymore. Doctors, in a sense, are in an extraordinarily powerful position. If nobody can get the drugs other than them, can get the company drug other than them prescribing it, they have a hell of a lot of power over the company. Yeah, if they actually say, well, we're seeing a lot of people with PSSD, unless you tell us a little bit more about what's going on or when you realize this is happening first, and we include in the material that we give people an account of what the risks are, we aren't going to give this drug.
Hmm.
But they don't do it. And as a result, the only thing that makes doctors wake up slightly is when I say to them, look, if the drugs work as well as you say and are as free of problems as you say, you're going out of business. Nurses are cheaper prescribers, pharmacists are cheaper prescribers, and we'll have robotic prescribing soon.
Mhm. I want to ask you more about PSSD because I had people request this topic.
Yeah.
So post SSRI sexual dysfunction, you talked about the muting of genital sensation that you said most people feel this right away on SSRIs. So for PSSD, let's start with the basics here. What is this in concrete terms, in terms of how it manifests? How common is it? And let's just start there.
Yeah. Well, close to 100% of people who take these drugs will have some genital numbing. Not everybody will be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will be. And it isn't just that they'll be aware of it. The story really takes off in the late 1960s, early 1970s when Ciba-Geigy, making a drug which we now know is a potent serotonin reuptake inhibitor, clomipramine, realized that the antidepressant dose of this was 150 milligrams, but in a 10 milligram dose, it could solve premature ejaculation problems for men by making their genitals that bit more numb.
Hmm.
And if you took the pill, a 10 milligram pill, just a fraction of the antidepressant dose, 30 minutes before you made love, you were going to have a much more successful time. And they put articles in the newspapers about how your partner is going to love you even more because she is going to think, wow, it was pretty depressing when he came so quickly, basically. So that was well known back in the early 1970s.
Wow.
It was well known in the early 1980s that, and I can remember a very arresting talk I was at, a behavior therapist in the UK called Isaac Marks, who figured that behavior therapy is the best treatment for OCD, was being muscled out, a bit worried about the fact that Ciba-Geigy were also marketing clomipramine for OCD, and it is a good treatment for OCD. Okay, and this is the drug from which the observations that it can make you less reactive came that led to the creation of the SSRI group of drugs. But anyway, clomipramine was muscling in on the OCD market, and Marx was not terribly keen on all this. And he said, there can be awful problems linked to this drug. He was treating a nun for OCD, and he said when they stopped the drug, she was left with permanent orgasms afterwards. So just the opposite, just the mirrored image of PSSD, and it's what's called PGAD, persistent genital arousal disorder.
So there's a
Now,
persistent sensory issue, and it can go in either direction.
yes, it's mostly you get numb, but you can have just the opposite. And this is, as it were, an akathisia of the genital area. Okay. Now, you can imagine this happening to a nun. I mean, this is the reason that the image kind of stuck for me. But this was the mid 1980s. So we knew that persistent post-treatment issues could be happening as far back as then. I was involved in a trial for SmithKline Beecham on Paxil in the early to mid 1990s, and they were going to look at the sexual effects of Paxil compared to clomipramine, which was the other drug it was being compared with, and they knew clomipramine was going to cause problems. Okay, but I mean, they drew up, the protocol for the trial, and there was going to be specially designed questionnaires to investigate the sexual aspects of all these drugs. And we, the investigators, had all these things to look through and things like that. And there was an investigators meeting in Monte Carlo, would you believe, on the Riviera,
Hmm.
Mediterranean, plush hotel, et cetera. All the investigators were there. And we were told, look, don't complete any of the sexual questionnaires. Just don't leave them out. Okay. And we didn't really ask questions. The kind of surroundings were too nice to bother the company with saying, why not ask these questions? It later became clear to me that when I got a chance to see some of the healthy volunteer trials that SmithKline Beecham had done on this in the mid 1980s, so 10 years before this, they had found serious sexual problems in a bunch of young men,